And then I was brought in for my final height and weight. And if I failed this one, they were going to kick me out of the army, and it was going to be a close call.
May, how did you find Carnivore?
Okay, so I first found Carnivore from Jordan Peterson. However, at the time, I didn't think of it as something that applied to me because his story was so specific. He had all these serious health issues that like went away from this like extreme diet. And I believed his story. I didn't have a good reason not to, but I didn't really have any health issues, at least nothing that seemed serious or diagnosable at the time. So I kind of, brushed it off as for people who are really sick. I first started to consider that maybe carnivore might be for me when I saw Michaela Peterson's podcast where she had Ken Berry on. And the thing that was interesting about that podcast for me is that he went over the fact that it's a myth that saturated fat is bad for you, and and that I remember that specifically stuck out to me because I wasn't shying away from red meat, but he kind of framed it in a way that made me realize that maybe the way that I was eating wasn't actually the way I was designed to eat. And at the time, it did cause me to start making some changes in my diet. I started not draining the fat out of my beef, for example, and I started having grains a little less with my meals, but I was still eating a lot of grains and I was still eating a lot of added sugars. So there are two main problems that I had that made me want to consider carnivore for myself. And I kind of started to piece together as I went along that there were more health issues that I was starting to develop, but I was kind of young and they were just beginning. But the two main ones were I found out that I had nasal polyps. Um, when I was a kid, I had a lot of vivid dreams and I loved dreaming. And around my early teen years, I stopped having dreams. And I also started waking up several times a night. And I wouldn't feel well rested. Even if I slept for like 12 hours, I would still wake up feeling really tired. And I kind of just accepted that that's the way it was. There were a lot of nights where I did not get enough sleep at all. I was very dopamine addicted and I would put off bedtime like well into my adulthood, getting maybe like 5 hours of sleep a night. And then on weekends, I'd sleep in. But even when I did sleep in, I didn't have the dreams, didn't feel well rested, woke up several times a night. So at some point, it kind of occurred to me. I was 21 at the time, and it kind of occurred to me like, okay, maybe it's not normal that I can't breathe through my nose very well. Maybe it's not normal that I don't have a very good sense of smell. And my daughter, I took her to a pediatric visit, and I asked the pediatrician if he happened to know what it might have been. And he said, oh, yeah, like it might be nasal polyps, which for those who don't know, nasal polyps are non-cancerous, like skin growth on the inside of your nasal passageway that can obstruct breathing. So he checked in my nose, told me that's what I have, and he told me that he could get me a prescription for like a steroid you spray up your nose. And I've been very wary since I was a kid and started noticing warnings on the labels of our like medicine cabinet items. I started to kind of be wary of basically pharmaceutical products. So I'm like, okay, I'll take this as a last resort, but I want to see if I can heal it naturally. And I also learned that you can use the steroids and they can come back later on. And you can have nasal polyps surgically removed and they can also come back later on then. So it wasn't high priority for me. So I spent a little bit of time looking into natural remedies, and it was stuff like ginger and turmeric, and try putting some like tea tree oil on the inside of your nose, and that wasn't working. But when I heard the interview from Ken Berry, it started to, well, I'm like, okay, so there are all these people with all these health issues. It's not just Jordan Peterson's autoimmune disease and depression. It's like, severe heartburn and rosacea, all that stuff. I wonder if there's anybody out there who's ever gotten rid of nasal polyps through carnivore. So I went and I looked online and I just Googled like carnivore nasal polyps. And I found like, I think two stories on like Quora or Reddit or somewhere. And at least one person in one of the forums was saying that they had nasal polyps severe enough that even after several surgeries, the polyps kept coming back worse. And it was so severe they were thinking of suicide. But they tried carnivore and it went down. And I thought, okay, what's the pattern there? Because I wasn't ready to try carnivore yet, but I was like, okay, is there a pattern here? And I started to think, okay, maybe the nasal polyps are results of inflammation. I know sugar causes inflammation. Let me see if I can cut out some of the sugar in my diet and see what happens. And just for a reference of what I was eating then, I was eating 3 meals a day, but my meals were very big because I always wanted to have leftovers. I was always snacking. And then at the end of the day, I was always eating junk food while watching TV, foods with added sugar. And I would also have sugary coffee every morning. So I thought, okay, what if I cut out the sugary coffee for like 2 weeks and see what happens? So I cut out the sugary coffee for 2 weeks, and it was like December of 2022. So I cut out the sugary coffee for 2 weeks, and I started dreaming, and my husband said that I was snoring less. And I felt like when I would wake up, because I have an alarm, so I still wasn't getting a full night's sleep. But normally, if I wake up to my alarm, I would feel like a certain level of tiredness that, you kind of like start to wake up through it. And this time, it was like a heavier tiredness that I had to wake up through. And I like, because your brain tries to paralyze your muscles when you're sleeping so you don't act out your dreams. My muscles were more difficult to move than they ever were in like my teenage years or adult life. And I took that as a really good sign. Like, yeah, I felt kind of worse when I woke up in a way, but I was really excited I'd started to dream again. Because, it was my early teen years when I was last dreaming and getting that deep into sleep. Well, except for pregnancy, I had 2 pregnancies, and each of those times, like, I would dream as well, but I would wake up with a very dry mouth. So clearly, I was just tired, and my body was forcing me to sleep through it anyway, and I had to have my mouth open. So I'm like, okay, well, this is good. This is something that's working. And then I thought, all right, well, when I had my first kid, the nausea during my pregnancy was extremely severe for several months. Like every waking moment was excruciating, and I wondered if I could get rid of that. Well, actually, I'd had 2 pregnancies by then, and I wanted to see if I could get rid of that. I haven't had my third baby yet, but we're going to try to get pregnant in a couple months, and I'm going to see how my diet affects that. Um, but that was the second thing. So I thought, this is again December 2022, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna give it like a year to see how to see what I learn, to prepare, get myself in that psychological headspace, and then I'll start carnivore in like January of 2023. Well, I'm in the Army, and the Army has body composition requirements. You can't be too fat, and it also has every 6 months you have to take an Army combat fitness test to see that you're kind of meeting Army physical fitness standards. And I failed. Which one did I fail first? I failed the height and weight first, and I was about 200 pounds at that time. I might have been like actually 195 because I'd started to make the small changes based on that video with Ken Berry and Michaela Peterson. So I lost like maybe 5-ish pounds, but it was very slow going. It took a couple months to get there. But I decided, you know what? I've been watching a lot of carnivore content, including like, beginner mistakes, things I wish I knew when I first started carnivore. And I think I've kind of got the gist of it. And so what I decided to do is, okay, in order to lose weight fast enough, because there's a certain standard for how much weight you have to lose in a certain time frame, you either have to lose 1% body fat or you have to lose, I think it's between 3 and 8 pounds. It might be between 2 and 8 pounds per month. And if you lose one or both of those things, then you're on good track. And otherwise, they'll chapter you out. So I'm like, okay, I'm just going to start carnivore now. And they had options when so basically in the Army, we do this thing called counselings. You can either get a negative counseling, which is informing you that you're being punished, a positive counseling where you're being praised for doing something well, or a general counseling where it's just like information, like this is what's expected of you, or here's what's happened. And so when I failed my height and weight, they gave me this counseling that told me what was going to happen now. So it's telling me, you've got to go to second, we call it PT. It stands for physical training, and it's the word we use for exercise. So we would do our morning PT, and then they would have us do our afternoon PT, which was special emphasis PT, or SEPT for short. And they're like, okay, you're going to go to SEPT PT in the afternoons. You're going to go see an Army nutritionist, and they're going to tell you like how to eat your diet. And here is a list of different options that you can take to try and lose weight. And it's like you can count calories using a free app like MyFitnessPal, or I can't remember what the other ones were. And there was a third option for, or sorry, there was a final option for like come up with your own plan and list it out here. So I basically explained in my plan that I was going to be doing the carnivore diet, and don't worry because I'm taking precautions to make sure I'm doing it safely, because it sounds extreme. People call it a fad diet. And I'm like, I'm going to be carefully monitoring how I'm doing things to make sure that, like, if something's wrong, I can tell, because I wanted my chain of command to be at ease. So I started the carnivore diet by saying, okay, like, I don't know where I'm going to have trouble or where I'm not. So what I'm going to do is tell myself I'm a carnivore. I'm a carnivore. And I'm going to go throughout my day and try to eat a carnivore diet. And where I end up not eating carnivore, I'm going to be like, okay, what was the problem there? And then I'm going to try and figure out that problem. So I did that for about like maybe a week or something like that before I finally had my first full day of carnivore. And basically, my work was having like a picnic and there was Mission Barbecue. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to have Mission Barbecue, but I'm not going to have any of the bread. I'm not going to have the macaroni and cheese, not going to have the vegetables. I'm just going to stick to the meats. And it was like exciting, actually. Like I was starting something new, and like I, I felt like emotionally, I felt like I was already getting healthier, even though it was like physically nothing was changing at that moment. Um, so that was day one of carnivore, but I decided I wanted to do it for a 90-day trial. And by then, I probably would be off the height and weight program because people were losing weight quickly. I think I lost an average of like 7 pounds a month during the 3 months I did carnivore. I ended up having some slip ups. One of them was intentional. My one of my best friends got married, and I decided to have some cake. The rest of it was more just like an issue of convenience because I'm in the army, I have two young kids, like I've got a pretty busy life, and cooking, it's very easy to eat strict carnivore. But when you're ordering out, like sometimes it gets trickier based on what's in the dining facility, what's in the cafeteria, what's in the fast food places around. But I did pretty well. I felt really good. I had things that I didn't realize were problems get resolved. For example, it turns out I had really low energy. I was actually a single mother for like the first year or two of my daughter's life. I was completely single for 1 year. I met my husband when my daughter was a couple of months old. And we started a relationship when she was 1, and we got married when she was 2. So the first year of her life, infancy, I was completely a single mother. And in the second year of her life, I had some help from my husband, but we weren't living together. Um, and he was helping out, but it was still like my kid at the time. He wasn't dad yet. And I had like no energy when I would come home. It like I could play with her somewhat, but I didn't have the energy to cook. I didn't have the energy to clean. It was like all I could do to just get through the day until she was asleep. And I would like put off picking her up from daycare till as late as I could because like I kind of dreaded the crying. And there were other single moms that I knew who were soldiers, and they seemed to be doing really well, and like their homes were clean, and they were meal prepping. And I'm like, you're cooking dinner every night and you're like cooking to like make food for the next night. Like I didn't know how they were doing it. I didn't think there was something wrong with me per se. Like clearly there was, because my home is a wreck and like I'm struggling and whatever else. But I'm like, I can't figure out what it would be. And it wasn't till I did carnivore and like my energy levels got stable that I'm like, oh, okay, I just had really bad energy. And I can actually feel some of that exhaustion coming back when I like deviate too far from carnivore. But now I know what it is. Now I know it's diet related, and I'm like, okay, I just got to ease up the carbs for a while, stick to meat. Element helps a lot also. So like that was one thing that went away. And there were like little aches and pains too. One thing I noticed, because I'm doing PT twice a day. I'm not feeling sore when I'm done with PT, even though I'm doing all the same workouts. and I was getting stronger a lot faster, even though I was doing all the same workouts. And that was interesting. And I also had a period of time on the Army Combat Fitness Test. One of the things, there are 6 events, and one of the things I struggled with the most was the run. And so I started kind of running on my own. There's a great app that I use called Zombies Run. It's like cheap, and it's like an interactive storyline, where you're in a zombie apocalypse and you have to listen through your headphones for these transmissions. So it kind of made running fun, and I would run on my own. And the app includes these schedules that you can choose. Like there's 5K expert, 10K beginner, half marathon. Like you can pick your program, and it'll tell you what days of the week to run, how long or how far you've got to run, what intensity, all that. Um, so I started doing that, and one of the run plans I was doing, it was the 5K expert plan, and it was running 6 days a week. And because it was running 6 days a week, I had to make it happen, or else I wasn't going to keep that schedule. I think it was like 8 weeks long or something. And in the past, I tried to run every day to train for a fitness test, but I would start to get shin splints, which is like it's the start of your shins fracturing. You haven't broken your leg, you haven't fractured it yet, but they're starting to fracture. And so it's like, okay, I guess running every day is just too much for my body. But when I was doing carnivore, I was able to run those 6 days a week, and I was not getting shin splints. So I'm not getting shin splints. I'm not getting sore. Like I'm having these aches and pains go away that I didn't even realize I had actually, even during carnivore. I didn't realize they were better. I'm just like, wow, I feel really good. And after the 30 days were over, I'm like, okay, now like I've been able to hold off the junk food because I kept telling myself, just get to the end of the 90 days and you can hold off that long. That was what kept me going, is saying, okay, I can have whatever I want to eat after these 90 days are over. So I spent like 2 weeks on the standard American diet, and these pains came back that I didn't even realize that I'd had before because I'd forgotten about them. Um, and and I'm like, okay, this is just reaffirming that I want to do like this change in my lifestyle. So I tried to get back onto carnivore, but it was really hard to stay away from the carbs. But I noticed, because this was now a year ago, this started like I think June to August or September was when I was doing carnivore. This was of 2023. So September was when I started my 2 week standard American diet. So then I tried to get back to carnivore. It wasn't really working. I was continuing to lose weight, but it was slower. And I had this strange period in November where I didn't feel like eating one day. I'm like, okay, I'm just not going to eat today. And then the next day I still felt good. I'm like, okay, I'm not going to eat today either. And I'm like, let me see how long this goes. So I think I went 3 days, and then I was brought in for my final height and weight. And if I failed this one, they were going to kick me out of the army, and it was going to be a close call. So they checked how much I weighed. They used the measuring tape to see like what my body fat percentage was, and I was good to go. I was off the program, and I broke my fast, even though I still felt like not eating with more junk food. Felt kind of crappy, but I'm like, okay, I'm still on a win streak. And by that point, I'd gotten down to about 165 pounds. So since then, I decided, okay, I can't keep calling myself a carnivore because that's not accurate to what I'm actually doing, and I want to be honest with my words. But I still really believe in this carnivore thing. What do I call myself now? So I kind of thought about how to describe my diet, and now what I'd say is that I'm animal-based low carb, at least most days. Low carb is defined typically as being under 100 grams of carbs per day. Um, so I do that, and I have I have junk food, but I try to save it for either special things I wouldn't normally get, like some sort of a foreign treat, maybe some sort of like a cultural dessert, or I try to save it for special occasions like weddings or some sort of celebration. Um, and I've noticed that like even though I'm not feeling as good as I did on carnivore, I have stable energy levels now, and I'm a lot more productive than I used to be, and I haven't gained the weight back. Because a lot of people they diet, and then as soon as they're done dieting, they put on all that weight back again, and I've maintained. I've gone up and down a little bit. Sometimes I'll go up to like 168 from water weight, and on rare occasion I've been down to like 159, but it kind of just stays around 165. So I'm working. I'd like at some point to do like another carnivore, like 30 to 90-day thing, but this is where I am for now. And it's just like doing carnivore did it really changed the way that I think about diet and the way that I think about my health in a positive way.
Regarding the sleep and the nasal polyps, that's completely gone.
It's not completely gone. I do still snore, but it's a lot lighter. I do dream on a consistent basis though. And I'm still not caught up on sleep, and a lot of that is on me because I don't usually go to bed at reasonable hours. I've just developed this habit over the years of staying up late. And I have not yet caught up on the sleep. I'm hoping to get there. So nasal polyps aren't yet gone. I suspect they would go away completely if I did stick to strict carnivore, but I'll have to wait till I try it again to see if that works.
And with the way you're eating, how has your husband and family accepted this?
So my kids are right now, my oldest is almost 6 and my youngest is 2.5. At first, my husband was like, okay, I'm all right with cutting out sugar and grains for them, but I think they still need vegetables. But he hasn't actually really pressed that. My husband does most of the cooking for the kids. I usually cook for myself because I'm very picky about how I like my food. But he cooks for the kids and he gives them animal-based low carb. So he'll be like, "Oh, I'm making tacos," but then there's like no shell. He just puts like the meat, the cheese, the sour cream in the bowl directly, and they eat it with spoons or forks. Um, or like, we'll make them burgers, and it's just the burger patties, and we'll either put cheese on top, or we'll slice the patty into like strips that they can pick up, and they'll dip it in like either ketchup or something like that. Or we'll give them like rotisserie chicken with butter. So the kids are eating animal-based low carb when they're at home. Unfortunately, daycare still feeds them crap. My husband, for a long time, he's like, I like the idea of maybe trying carnivore, but it's too expensive. And I was trying to tell him, I'm like, okay, but there are a lot of videos out there now about how to do it cheaply. He's like, yeah, I'm not sure. Well, a couple of days ago, I brought some beef tongue home from the store, and I was like, yeah, I changed my mind. I don't feel like figuring out how to cook this. You can have it if you want. So we asked a battle buddy of ours, who we thought might know a good recipe, and he basically gave us instructions on how to cook it. You have to boil it for like 3 hours in like water that's like an inch above the tongue itself. So my husband did that, and he loved it so much. He loved it so much. He's like, okay, I might go carnivore now. Um, and and he's talking about how like the beef tongue was only, it's like around $8 a pound, which is still kind of expensive. It's not as cheap as some of the nasty stuff that's colored, because I go to the grocery store, that's an organic store usually, and so I know what meat's supposed to look like. I've seen all the grass-fed, expensive, healthy stuff. And then I go to the commissary, which the commissary is like the grocery store that's on the military base, and most of it's red. I'm like, it's not supposed to be that red, I don't think, but it's all red. So at first I was like, okay, maybe it's just me. But then I looked around and I found one section where there are some meats that are brown, like they're supposed to be. I'm like, okay, yeah, that's what it is. So other than the like super nasty looking red stuff, it's like a little on the cheaper side. So I think he's excited about the beef tongue. I don't know that he's ready to dive into carnivore yet, but I'm thankful that there's at least that little bit of change. And I'm very happy that he's on board with our kids eating an animal-based fatty diet.
Yeah. Well, what I found is just the fact that you're not snacking all the time and you reduce the number of meals you're having kind of naturally, whether it's down to 2 or 1, it ends up being cheaper in the long run anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, like we're definitely spending less money on junk food. And the kids are like pretty satisfied. And I think Ken Berry was talking about how if you look at price per weight, cereal's actually much more expensive than meat. And that was like our go-to meal on Saturdays because I like to sleep in. So my husband would give them cereal just so that they like wouldn't bother me while I was sleeping. But we don't do that anymore. And our food bills have not increased since I started carnivore. So
Yeah, I mean, and just on the cereals, when you think about it, um, you would have to spend millions of dollars on the cereal to get any nutrition, and you probably still wouldn't get any nutrition,
it's true.
assuming the fortified vitamins are not that well absorbed anyway.
My logic had been, I know it's not good for my kids, but it's something that'll fill their bellies and make them not feel hungry. And then when I realized how terrible cereal was for you, I was like, okay, I need a new plan because like I can't in good conscience give my kids cereal anymore. I don't want them to go hungry, so let me see if I can find some better options. So I started buying pork rinds, I started buying jerky, and like I have dried kale, and I kind of just like tried to find some more animal-based low carb snacks for them, and sometimes they eat it and sometimes they don't. But if they're so not hungry that they don't want to eat the pork rinds, like, and they wait till lunch when I like wake up to feed them, it's probably fine. Like, the military is very serious about like abuse, which is a good thing in that it's making sure to take care of its service members and the families of the service members. But unfortunately, they can go a little bit overboard, and we've had the police called on us several times in the last like 2 years from the daycare centers, from like people reporting suspected child abuse and child neglect. And so in my mind, I have this voice of like, my kids can't skip breakfast. Like, if somebody knew it, not that they would know, but I'm still hearing these voices in my mind. Like, if somebody knew, they'd accuse me of child neglect. But I'm trying to like not let emotions dictate my actions. And especially like the more reports I had filed against me, I stopped feeling scared and anxious and started just being like, "Ugh, here we go again," like just annoyed, really. And we've come back innocent every time. So I try to be like, it's okay to just do what I think is best for my kids. And if other people are gonna throw a fit about it, okay, yeah, it's annoying to have an investigation going on, but they're gonna find me innocent like they always do. So
Yeah. I yeah. I'm just trying to imagine this scenario. The childcare is like, we suspect child abuse. Someone's got to look after these kids for a moment while we report it. Give them a candy bar. You
yeah,
know,
yeah.
but the childcare is probably, when you think of abuse, the food that's being given is probably what's abusive.
Yeah, yeah, like they have like cereal and canned fruits and stuff for breakfast. And they have like, they'll give like graham crackers as snacks. And I guess the fruit's not so bad, but some of it I'm pretty sure is soaked in syrup in the cans. That I have more of a problem with, and they don't give meat and eggs as often as I'd like. But something that's positive, there's this woman who works at the front desk who always hands out candy on Fridays to the kids, of course, assuming with the parents' permission. The parents almost always say yes. And I repeatedly was denying, and my kids wanted candy. And like, I kind of wanted them to be able to participate in the tradition. And once in a while, I would let them get candy. But for the most part, I'd just say no. And my 5-year old is like whining about it. And the teacher asked me, instead of asking the kids, she just started asking me like, "Oh, can your kids have like a snack?" And I'm like, "Not unless it's healthy." And she's like, "What's healthy?" And I'm like, "Meat." So like the next Friday, she calls me over and she's like, "Hey, like I heard what you said," and she pulls out a little Slim Jim, a mini Slim Jim, and she's like, "Would this be okay to give your kids?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that's great." Like, it's not the healthiest thing. It's still got preservatives and who knows what in there, but it wasn't a recreational drug. Because to me, candy, I've now learned it's a recreational drug. Um, and so now, like on Fridays, when all the other kids are getting candy, my kids don't have to feel left out. They get to have a little Slim Jim from the front desk. So that
That's
was very
nice.
sweet.
You passed the physical with the in the army. Like, how I don't really understand how it works. Like, is it like in a reserve? You're living on the base.
I live off base, but I have permission to. So essentially, you're either living in the barracks or you're receiving a housing allowance. And if you receive a housing allowance, And that would be for like a non-commissioned officer, someone who's like higher ranking, or that would be for someone who's married. So since I'm married, I get a housing allowance, and you can either use that housing allowance to live on post in the on post housing, or you can use it to find a home off post. And my husband and I bought a house off post.
Like a full-time job, or are you in reserve, or I'm not sure how it works.
Um, so I'm active duty, which means it's officially my full-time job. Officially speaking, I'm on duty at any time of day. They can call me on the weekends, they can call me at night, and I'm like supposed to answer. Practically speaking, though, it kind of just looks like a normal work week. Like other than the fact that I have to wake up earlier to do PT, I'm kind of working like normal daytime hours, and then I usually have the weekends off. It's a little different for me right now because I'm on a detail called Military Funeral Honors, where basically when a service member or a veteran dies, soldiers will come in like our service uniform, and we perform a little ceremony and we fold a flag. And funerals can happen any day of the week, so I'm kind of officially on duty like 24/7, and my schedule's like weird for the next 3 months that I'm on a detail. But ordinarily it would just be like a normal work week.
So if you're on active duty, how does that impact the way you're eating?
So I have to be a little more flexible with how I eat, just in terms of like my duties, because I have to eat around when I have the availability to get food. But there's, at some point during the day, I'm offered time to eat. Um, so yeah, it's the only thing that's difficult about eating in the military is from a convenience standpoint. I don't necessarily always have access to a fridge. So meal prepping can be a little difficult. Plus, I don't really like meal prepping anyway. So I tend to eat out a lot. But I try to eat at least animal-based low carb when I eat out.
Currently, you're animal-based, like low carb, and
Mhm.
the number of times you're eating a day is how many?
I usually eat twice a day. Sometimes if I'm not working out, like maybe on a Saturday, I'll eat like once. But I generally have two meals, which are dinner and what I call work meal. The times of day that I eat vary. Part of it depends on how hungry I am, but part of it also depends on what my duties are that day. Um, and so my work meal can be anywhere from like 9 a.m. to like 4 p.m. And dinner is, well, maybe more like 3 p.m. And dinner is more like anywhere between 4 p.m. and whenever I go to bed, like close to midnight. So mostly just the two meals a day. And before I have work meals, sometimes I might have like coffee with heavy cream. So while it's not actually a meal, it would change, I guess, how my body reacts, because, there's intermittent fasting and your body reacts a certain way when you go a certain amount of time without food. So I don't know if my body counts my coffee as a meal or not, but I consider it two meals a day.
Nice. So if someone you've been through this experience of getting started with carnivore
Hmm.
and through an extended period of time on it, if someone was interested in doing it, what advice would you give them to get started?
So I might ask them first, like why they're starting it, because could be some risks for some people who dive right in. Like people who are coming off of a vegan diet or a heavily plant-based low-fat diet, like they can have issues with oxalate dumping. And Anthony Chaffee said that if you are low fat, that you can form gallstones from being low fat, and that those stones can start to move once you're eating fat again. So like there could possibly be some risk there with diving straight in. So I'd say mostly just look into it. There's a lot of resources out there on how to start carnivore. There's a lot of people out there giving mistakes they made when they first started carnivore, and a lot of those carry a lot of useful tips. Um, and what you'll also want to do is, based on why you're starting carnivore, I'd recommend finding content that tailors to sort of your reasoning. If you struggle with autoimmune conditions, look up like how carnivore affects that. If you're struggling with like low energy, or if you have like certain medical conditions, whatever it is, or whatever goals you want to accomplish from it, look up carnivore from that perspective as well, because that will be like huge in finding stuff that relates specifically to you. You know, instead of me just giving the tip, I would say look into that information. And I'd also say a lot of people, when they try carnivore, if they encounter a problem with it, this is what I've seen from like people I've met in real life. I haven't seen it online, but in real life, I'll talk to people about carnivore and they're like, "Oh yeah, I tried it. It just didn't work for me." And I ask them like what went wrong, and most of the time the answer is something that could have been easily fixed. I think the most common thing I've seen actually is like issues with like cramping and low energy, and I'm like, just up your fat intake and get salt. Like, pretty straightforward answer. So I'd say if something seems like it's not working for you on carnivore, don't give up right away. Look into, I'm having X problem on carnivore, because someone might actually know what's going on and have a tip for how to resolve it. And it would be really sad if you started carnivore and gave up on it and thought this isn't working for me, when it turns out to be exactly what you needed. You'd be missing out on a great opportunity because you hit a roadblock and jumped the gun.
And what would you say to people that say carnivore is too restrictive?
Okay, so I would give you my personal feelings on it as someone who's mostly healthy, and I'd also give you the perspective that I've heard from people like Ken Berry, in that interview with Michaela Peterson. Starting with what people with serious health issues say is that the real restricting thing is when you have um, obesity and it's hard for you to move in your body, when you have low energy, when you're in pain all the time. Those are the things that like actually restrict you. And when you do carnivore, for people with those health conditions, it's very, very freeing, because now they're able to kind of fully live life and feel great in a way they didn't before. For someone like me who's mostly healthy, I would say that honestly, yes, it can feel a little restricting, but if you at least know the truth, to yourself, that makes it easier to be at ease with your decision. I'm all about informed consent, right? You can decide to do whatever you want to do as long as you know the truth. And if you know that meat is best for your health, and you know that grains and starches and added sugars are recreational drugs, and if you know that vegetables can carry nutritional benefits, but they can also cause harm for people who are sensitive to them, like from there, it's a lot easier to make decisions regarding your health. I'd also say that if you feel like carnivore is going to be too restrictive, just give it a chance, because you can always tell yourself that at the end of that trial period, you can go back to eating whatever you want to do. You don't have to decide you want to go carnivore and now you're committed forever. You can give it a try and then decide how you feel afterwards. And finally, I'd say that you can make it fun by exploring the products that are out there. Like, it sounds restricting to be like, oh, I can only eat animal products, but when you think about it, there's meat, but there's different kinds of animals, and there's different cuts of meat from the different animals. There's different kinds of fish. There's different, like, you can have pork chops, pork loin, pork belly. You can have, like, lamb, all the different cuts of steak. You can try seafood. You can go to the store and there's like a wide selection of cheeses. There's a whole bunch of different yogurts. There's a whole bunch of different milks you can try. And it can be fun to kind of go through the process of grocery shopping, finding the stuff that you like enough to do it over and over again, but then branching out and being like, let me try this thing I haven't tried before. So it can be really exciting, because, and um, Jordan Peterson, he had some videos where he talked about creativity, and he said that obviously too much restriction inhibits creativity, but if you have like a parameter of kind of what your limits are, if you have some defined limits, it can actually be a lot easier to be creative, because now you're working with these things, and the way you can move those things around is a lot, like, there's a lot more you can do with it. And I'll give you an example. My main thing whenever I cook dinner for myself is I'll cook a meat, and unless I'm cooking scallops, I'll usually have my food with a dairy product of some kind. And to me, it's normal. Okay, I have a meat, I have a dairy product. One day I made some food. It was too much food for me. I asked my husband if he wanted to have the leftovers, and afterwards I asked him what he thought of it. And he was like, well, it's really weird. I'm like, weird? How is it weird? And he's like, I mean, it's steak with ricotta cheese on top. And to me, I'm like, well, I'm like, okay, yeah, I see how that's weird. To me, it didn't seem weird anymore because I'm like, it's a dairy and a meat. But that's like not a combination I would ever think to put together if it weren't for carnivore, because I had to work with what was in the realm of carnivore. So it kind of like gives you a creative space, and like even just the way you cook your meat. Like there are a lot of carnivores who do different things with their meat. Like you can get super fancy, like Anthony Chafee, who has like racks in his fridge where he ages his meat. You can like oven cook it, grill it. You know, I throw mine on a pan with butter. So there's just like a lot to experiment with that you can use to make it fun, at least during your trial period.
So May, do you have social media or anything if people want to reach out to you?
So I have a YouTube channel called Coffee House for Truth Seekers. And I don't upload frequently yet. I would love to be able to do it full time at some point. I'm just very busy now, but I do have things in the pipeline. Like at all times, I'm always working on something. So you can, check out my content there. And if you want to like reach out to me directly, you can email me at maylenedawnblake@gmail.com. Um, and Dave, you're free to kind of put the address in the description so people can read how it's spelled. Yeah.
Sure, I'll do that. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story, May. I really appreciate it.
Thanks again for having me.